Paolo Banchero speaks about his place in the NBA's future and what comes next for the Orlando Magic. We'll break down a key lesson, perhaps, from the Cleveland Cavaliers and the mess that they seem to be in right now. And we'll glean some lessons from our trade exercise earlier in the week. It's time for Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is May 17th, 2024. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You, of course, find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, Paolo Banchero comments on his place in the league's future, plus what he wants to see the Orlando Magic do. We'll break down those comments and more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Magic. We'll also take some lessons from the Cleveland Cavaliers, as well as what we learned from our trade exercise earlier in the week. Let's recap some stuff we talked about earlier this week, shall we? Before we do any of that, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So yesterday we spent a lot of time talking about Paolo Banchero, and we named him our season MVP. Obvious stuff. We talked about how he really developed and turned himself into a star player. And we can debate whether he's a superstar yet or not. We can all agree, I would hope, that we understand that he is the kind of player that you can build your roster around, that he is the kind of player that can be the central figure for this team. And that, of course, is everything we want to see. That's everything we've wanted for this team for a very, very, very long time. And so obviously we sat here last year, I think, even saying the same things. I actually looked this up today because this article came out today from the Washington Post. We'll get to some of the comments there in a minute. But I sat here last year after Paolo Banchero said at his Rookie of the Year award presentation that it was playoffs or bust for the Magic this season. And we all took that, we all said, oh, that's great. That's a great attitude to have. We'll see what happens. But I remember taking it, and I wrote this, that it's very clear Paolo Banchero is the kind of player who expects to be competing at the highest levels. That he's the kind of player that can earn and push his team to that level. And that he wasn't going to wait. There was no slow playing this development and slow playing this potential. Now, granted, the Magic did slow play it a little bit. The Magic did go a little slow here. They really didn't make any changes to their roster that offseason, but they made the playoffs. It was the right call. Kudos to Jeff Weltman. Right call. But here's the kicker. But now the Magic have made the playoffs. Now they have taken a really good Cleveland team to 7 games. Now they were a half away from getting out of the first round. Now they've all sat there and said, we need home court advantage. We now understand how important home court advantage is. The goals for this team for next year are very clearly laid out. And while I think you can, on one hand, say this team overachieved, and on another hand, say this team underachieved because so many players didn't hit what we expect from them, and we know that this team can improve offensively. This is undoubtedly a summer of flux and of change. So, Paolo Banchero spoke to Ben Golliver of the Washington Post. And it's a free article. You can find it on WashingtonPost.com. And gave some thoughts about what comes next. First is this concept, we talked about this during the playoff series, that this playoffs does feel like a changing of the guard. It does feel like a passing of the baton. Your LeBrons, your KDs, your Stephs, they're all out of the playoffs. Instead, you've got kind of the, as Ben Golliver puts it, the older millennials. That's your, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Nikola Jokic. And now you've got your kind of new age players. Tyrese Halliburton, Jalen Brunson, Paolo Banchero, Anthony Edwards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka Doncic. Paolo Banchero very clearly sees himself as part of that group. And obviously he played with Team USA, and that lends some credence to it. But he very clearly sees himself as a player who can elevate a team. And look, the proof is in the pudding. 2 years ago, the Magic won 22 games. They've won 34 in Paolo's rookie year. They won 47 in his second year. I'm not sitting here saying the Magic are about to win 60 games next year. But Paolo Banchero has had an outsized impact on this team. And he's taken some major steps as an individual player, which we talked about yesterday. And as certainly as someone that can do a whole lot more. The question now is, how do the Magic get better? And that's what we've been wrestling with on Orlando Magic Daily. That's what we've been wrestling with here on this show is what do the Magic need and how do they get better? And look, I think I got to give Paolo credit. He's not quite at the level or maybe at the confidence level to exercise some control. He maybe doesn't have that leverage yet. But to say the least, he said at exit interviews, I trust the front office to make the right decisions, that they understand what this team needs, that they understand what we have and what we built. But Banchero tells Ben Golliver what he thinks this team needs. Quote, the front office wants two-way guys who add to what we already have in terms of our defensive identity, length, and versatility, Banchero said. Shooting is a big part of what we need to improve on, whether we go and get somebody or try to develop guys. I don't know which way they're going to approach that. And having a guy who could set the table and be reliable. We have a lot of talented guys who can make shots and make plays. Me, Franz, and Jalen Suggs. I'd rather be more of an offensive hub than the point guard, if that makes sense. If it sounds like Paolo Banchero has been listening to Locked On Magic, I certainly hope he has been, because those are a lot of things that I think we've all talked about here. That coming out of that playoff series was clear. Obviously, the Magic need shooting. 24th in the league in three-point field goal percentage, 29th in attempts. More threes, more spacing will help this team tremendously. It's why we talk about Malik Monk, why we talk about D'Angelo Russell, why we talk about Tyus Jones and about Klay Thompson and even Paul George. But I think a lot of us came out of the playoff series also acknowledging that Paolo Banchero had to do too much. And so it's the second half of that statement that I think really reveals what the Magic are looking for, what the Magic feel like they're looking for. Is a guy who can set the table and be reliable. I think Paolo is right here. This Magic team already has a lot. Between Paolo, Franz, and Suggs, the Magic have their core really set, or at least set for the short term. Honestly, as much as I think we all want to get excited about free agency and trade possibilities, and I saw the traffic on the assignments thing, and we'll probably do more of that. As much as we want to get excited about all of that, the most important move the Magic make this summer is re-signing Jalen Suggs and re-signing Franz Wagner, getting those extensions taken care of and locking those numbers in. That would be the biggest thing that could happen this summer. I will sit here and say my expectation for the Magic this offseason is to add at least one starter and two bench players, if not two starters and a bench player. I think that, and we'll get to the Wendell Carter thing in a minute. I think that finding a starting guard who can attack off the dribble and play off of Banchero is absolutely vital. And Banchero's right. He played a way too much point guard, but that doesn't mean you want the ball out of his hands. You want the ball in his hands where he can survey and read the defense before he attacks. And too often he had to bring the ball up and attack off the dribble. That's going to make life really hard. And so ultimately, Banchero was saying here what we've all said all offseason to this point. That the path forward for the Orlando Magic, the path forward for this team is to have a better ball handler, to have another guy who can attack and make Paolo and Franz's life easier. I don't think Paolo here is complaining about anything. Like, I'm the one complaining for him, if anything. But I think everyone can sense what this team needs to get to that next level. Just a way to diversify this team's attack. That's ultimately what's going to help Paolo be something that he wants to be. The big goal that he stated here in this article, he wants to average 30 points per game. He believes he can do it. And honestly, he can if he can get some easy shots along the way and make some free throws. But if he can get some easy shots along the way, and look, he's come a long way as a shooter already. Paolo knows, as well as every star knows, a franchise's future is in their hands. And we talked about this yesterday. Go back and listen to it if you didn't. Paolo Banchero is that superstar. And so now the Magic have to figure out, how do we add to this team? And that's a great segue to talk about our friends, the Cleveland Cavaliers. The playoff lessons, we're doing them again, the playoff lessons from the Cleveland Cavaliers, the team that beat the Magic. We'll talk about what we learned, what we can learn from their murky future coming up here in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals who are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion, that's with a B, professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. That's why LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make that process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process simpler and more efficient too. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We want to thank you for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. If you work from home like me, you usually have some type of sports programming on in the background, whether it's TV, whether it's podcast. I know when I'm listening to things, I don't like the talking heads. I don't like the shouting. It stresses me out. I don't need that stress. I want smart analysis, just like you get from me here at Locked On Magic. That's what you get across the Locked On Podcast Network. And that's why the Locked On Sports Day 24/7 streaming channel is for you. It's programmed every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. That's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So if you follow me for a little while, this is a young team. We're still learning what the playoffs are about. I like to do playoff lessons. I like to look at what other teams are doing and see if we can learn, especially as the Magic build themselves up. So, we may do fewer of these both on my written outlets as well as here on the show, because the Magic are at a different developmental stage now. Like, we're not going to learn a whole lot from the Atlanta Hawks anymore. Maybe we will. That maybe this kind of dovetails into that. But I think because I've seen the Magic connected to some of the things that are going on in Cleveland beyond just the Magic stressing the Cavs out in the 7-game series. What happened to Cleveland this year is a lesson for the Orlando Magic. I remember sitting here 2 years ago having the Donovan Mitchell debate with you all. It was a fair debate to have because Donovan Mitchell, I talked to David Locke about this, and we he asked me why the Magic weren't interested in Donovan Mitchell. And I said, I told him straight up, it's like, I just don't think the Magic are ready for that kind of pressure, and that kind, their culture isn't established to absorb the kind of attention and pressure that Donovan Mitchell brings. To which David, I think, rightly responded, when you have a player like Donovan Mitchell, he is your culture. And, that still rings true. And I think his point is valid. I think my point was valid too. And we had long debates about whether the Magic should have gone after Donovan Mitchell in the summer of 2022. And I said, if you believe, you drafted Paolo Banchero to be your star, not that he couldn't handle it, but when you grab a player like Donovan Mitchell, all of a sudden, all of your goals completely change. You haven't organically grown into a playoff team. You are a playoff team now, and nothing else matters. The Atlanta Hawks experienced this too, and they were doing it more to save their playoff run and save that playoff team. That going and getting DeJounte Murray for 4 first-round picks, pairing him with Trae Young, that set the floor very, very high. And obviously, in the last 2 years, Atlanta has been unable to meet it. Now, Orlando is back in this situation again. Like we're right back there. We're in a different place. I talked to several reporters when I was up in Cleveland, when I was, we were chatting about the series, and pretty much all of them said, like, look, Orlando's better than Cleveland was before they got Donovan Mitchell, but they're kind of in the same spot. And look, I think Cleveland made the right move at the end of the day. I think that Cleveland going to the play-in tournament with Darius Garland and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen said, we need one more piece to get over the hump to become a potential contender in this conference. They went out and got Donovan Mitchell. Guess what? They were the 4th seed in 2 consecutive playoffs. They finally got through, got to the second round. Injuries hurt them, but they weren't beating Boston. They accomplished a lot of their goals. And obviously, now they're back, but now they're in the part that we all feared. Does Donovan Mitchell really want to stay in Cleveland? That's the mystery. He'll tell you cap. That's cap. He does. That all these reports are bogus, but you could feel the tension in Cleveland when Orlando was playing them. How vital it was just to win that series, just to have a sense of accomplishment. The fact that JB Bickerstaff is very much on the hot seat, even after improving over last year. Something is amiss. And it's, frankly, I'm going to sit here and say it's nobody's fault. I think a lot of well-intentioned people did good things, made tough decisions, made aggressive decisions to make that team better. And perhaps that group is hitting its ceiling. But it is undoubted, after an all-star season, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell haven't quite figured out how to play with or off each other. I would, the number one question I had for every Cavs reporter I talked to, and especially around Game 5, was what happened to Darius Garland? Because frankly, he was the guy I was most afraid of in the series. Because Donovan Mitchell's going to do what Donovan Mitchell does. And obviously, look, he had 50 points in Game 6. He had, 38 in Game 7. That dude carried Cleveland to that series victory. And that's the level that Paolo Banchero is going to have to get to at some point. And look, Paolo carried the Magic through Game 7. So carried the Magic in Game 6 too. Paolo's kind of already there. Maybe he doesn't have quite the same ability that Mitchell has, but Mitchell's been in the league for a little while. He's been through a few of these playoff games. I'm not gonna sit here and hold Paolo to that same standard. Paolo acquitted himself well in Game 7. No one's complaining about him. But here's the rub. Donovan Mitchell's presence stopped Darius Garland's growth. Darius Garland is not the same player. And yes, his injury was a major one. That jaw injury is a major injury. And so maybe that was the problem with Cleveland, and maybe that was the problem with Garland, and maybe there isn't an issue in Cleveland. And if they run it back, add a little bit more shooting, get some good injury luck, Cleveland's in the conference finals next year. I can see it. Look, Donovan Mitchell's that good. I can see it. But that's the thing too. Ultimately, as the Magic begin to assess this offseason, and this is the lesson that Cleveland teaches. Ultimately, as the Magic assess what they're going to do this offseason and who they add to this team, the real question Orlando has to ask themselves is, are we ready for another layer of pressure? Are we ready? Is our culture ready to absorb a player that has their own ego, has their own expectations, and welcome him to the fold? I think Orlando today is certainly better prepared for that kind of a move than they were 2 years ago when the Donovan Mitchell case first came up. I don't know if Cleveland was ready. I'll say this, as far as culture building goes, what Jamal Mosley has built over the last 3 years is really impressive. Everybody has bought into what that man says. And I think honestly that locker room would police someone who didn't buy in because they're all bought in. At the end of the day, Paolo Banchero is the leader of this team. And that's the thing that's going to carry this team and help this team as they add players this summer. Now, is Klay Thompson going to listen to a Paolo Banchero? Is Paul George going to listen to a Paolo Banchero? Are they going to listen to a Jamal Mosley? That's ultimately the question you got to ask. Because, not that we're a Heat culture thing here, but the culture has to be bigger than everyone. It's a part of everyone. But when you're adding new players, when you're layering new pieces on top, they have to be absorbed into the fold and absorbed into what this team is trying to do. And look, this team is better prepared for it now than they were 2 years ago. But are they ready for a second rounder bust season? Are they ready to be title or bust, or title contenders or bust? Not that there's a move out there that would do that, but that's the lesson from the Cavs. Because perhaps if Cleveland doesn't do the Donovan Mitchell trade, they naturally progress into the first round. They build that culture. They put themselves, into that position. Darius Garland grows as he grows, and they have that core that can take on a big name player. Perhaps that's where that leads. Or perhaps this is always what they needed. Perhaps this is what they needed. We'll never know. Because Cleveland, you can only judge Cleveland on what they did. But to me, this is the lesson from the Cavs. Build your culture first. Then go get the star. And maybe the Magic are ready. My bet is they're not quite there yet. And so that's going to take us to our final segment, where we'll talk about what we learned from the trade exercise we did earlier this week with Mike Richmond. We'll talk about making fake trades here coming up in just a moment. But first, it's time for a quick word from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. I'm honestly pleasantly surprised that we didn't get killed on our little fake trade podcast that we did earlier this week. So pat myself on the back on that one. If you're listening, I patted myself on the back. I'm notoriously bad at fake trades. I'm gonna put that out there. It's not my favorite thing to do. As I say during the deadline, usually what I look for is a framework for a trade and a framework for a deal. And figure out, okay, we can figure out the pieces to make it work, but let's just get the bones of the deal on paper. And if there's bones there, we can find, whether a team does something or not depends on their motivation to do it. Anthony Simons is a really interesting player. And it deserved a podcast. It deserved a real deep look. There's obviously interest on the Portland side. Mike was the one that reached out to me. There's a lot of interest on the Magic side. Anthony Simons is the number one player that has commented whenever we talk about shooters or point guards or anything like that. And the more I looked at his numbers, the more I looked at the way that he plays, at least offensively, I definitely see it. And so it was worth doing a 40-minute podcast on. And ultimately, we kind of stuck on a deal that was centered on Wendell Carter and at least one first-round pick for Anthony Simons. We could debate whether you throw an Anthony Black or a second first-round pick. So essentially, it came down to Wendell Carter and two first-round picks, whether Black is one of stands in for one of them or not, and Anthony Simons. To me, that's too rich. To me, that was too much. I wanted to, my negotiation on that front was then, okay, let's expand it. Give me Robert Williams, and we'll say Carter and I would say two firsts, or I would say Carter and a first and a heavily protected first, to make something like that happen. So again, framework. We see the framework for a deal. What I want to do here, and Bleacher Report pitched a deal that was, I think, Cole Anthony and two firsts for Anthony Simons. So there's potentially multiple frameworks for a deal. And again, you heard from Mike Richmond. His goal with trading Anthony Simons is purely about cutting cost and cutting salary. So that's something Orlando can do with the cap room they have to absorb money in trades. That deal wouldn't be able to get consummated till after July 1st. There's a framework there. Again, that's to me what's most important when I talk about trades. But let's talk about what we learned. Let's talk about how that projects out to what a trade looks like, because whether Anthony Simons is the right guy for the Magic to chase after, that's not what I'm here to debate today. 40% catch and shoot 3-point shooter, defensive suspect. There are reasons to like him, reasons not to like him. But if you go to, but Anthony Simons, a 20-point per game scorer on a bad team, good 3-point shooter, that's kind of the level of guard the Magic are looking for. If we're looking at the bucket of guards that the Magic are willing to put assets into and willing to invest in, it's Simons, it's, Klay Thompson, it's D'Angelo Russell, it's, Tyus Jones probably on the back end of that group. Probably cheaper than all those options, but it's Paul George, it's DeJounte Murray. That's the level of prospect or level of player the Magic are looking to fill that role that assumedly they're foregoing on with Gary Harris. That's what the Magic are looking for. And so we look at that and we ask ourselves, okay, what did it cost to get there? And I would argue Wendell Carter almost has to be involved just for salary matching and salary filling. But more importantly, I think the lesson here is that in order for the Magic to execute one of these trades, they're going to have to be willing to give up draft assets and draft capital. And look, Orlando has a lot of draft picks. Not Oklahoma City a lot, but a lot of draft picks. They've got their pick this year, number 18. Whether that's valuable or not, we'll let someone else decide. They've got 2 picks in next year's draft. They got their own pick and a top 5 protected pick from Denver. I have a feeling they're going to get that pick from Denver next year. They've got 2 picks again in 2026, their own pick plus that weird pick. I think they got that weird pick with Phoenix and Washington. They get like the middle pick of the 3 between them, Phoenix and Washington, I think is the way that works. And then they got another pick coming from them too. Essentially though, it feels like if the Magic want to make a deal for Anthony Simons, if the Magic want to make a deal for DeJounte Murray, if they want to push in for a big-time free agent or big-time guard, they don't have the players to get it done. They're not willing, honestly, they're not willing to give up Anthony Black. I am not trading Anthony Black in an Anthony Simons deal. Would I trade, you heard me in that conversation. I really wanted to give up the Denver pick, or at least option the Denver pick. To say you get one of these 2 picks. I'm not interested in negotiating the actual details of it, but it was very clear it was going to cost at least 1 first-round pick to make that kind of a deal happen. And I think as you look at all the possible trades and all the possible targets the Magic could have that are at least at that high-level starter level, it's going to cost a first-round pick, if not 2 first-round picks. And again, I think again, for the purposes of this conversation, Anthony Black is a first-round pick in that trade with that Mike Richmond pitched me from Locked On Blazers. That's going to be the cost of doing business. And Jeff Wilton's done a very good job cultivating and holding on to his draft capital. He's done a very good job rebuilding the Magic's coffers and making them asset rich. And just like we talked about earlier about Donovan Mitchell, now the question is, when do the Magic start putting some chips in the table? When do they start spending to receive? Because, the old adage is, to get something good, you've got to give up something good. I don't want to give up Wendell Carter. I like Wendell Carter. I think the injury this year really hampered him. I think he's due for a bounce back season. He's a good shooter, floor spacer. He's a good defender. Just needs space, just needs positioning. There's no reason in my mind to give up on Wendell Carter. But his salary is awfully movable and awfully tradable, and the Magic don't have a lot of those. Joe Ingles at $11 million is going to be salary filler. And frankly, it's looking more and more like the Magic might decline that team option to have the extra space that they need. Jonathan Isaac is not getting traded. Cole Anthony on the first year of a 4-year extension is going to be really tough to trade, even though that number is not super onerous. Wendell Carter's got 2 years. His contract declines. That's a salary that's going to help somebody get under the luxury tax. That's just kind of the reality of the business. And that's the reality of how the Magic's contracts align. Like, I had a conversation today. It was like, if you believe Anthony Black's the point guard of the future, go sign Tyus Jones to a deal, understanding that he's going to be your point guard for 2 years while Anthony Black figures himself out. And when Anthony Black's ready to take over, you trade Tyus Jones for a $20 million player. Right now, honestly, the biggest task the Magic have is to start aligning their contracts for when they don't have cap room. They need big salary guys. They need some bigger salaries on their books to help them a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. They don't have that right now, and that's why trades are going to be very difficult. Now, having cap room to absorb salary is going to help. That would help in the Portland case. But it's something you got to watch out for. And so that's ultimately the lesson from our trade exercise, is figuring out what the Magic have to offer. It's for as much and as ambitious as the Magic should be, it's not a lot. And so honestly, the biggest thing the Magic have on their plate, and while I think everyone's would expect the Magic to be drafting in the teens and Denver to be drafting in the 20s, their 2 picks in 2025 are super valuable. It's a good draft coming up in 2025. Their future first-round picks probably hold a lot more value than most of the players on their roster. And that's going to be the thing that Jeff Wilton's going to have to decide. When do I start spending my draft capital? That's really the dilemma he's facing this summer as much as anything else. I want to thank you all for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at @PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and also listen to podcast to your podcast-enabled device. You can find us on YouTube. Search for Locked On Magic. And for the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can follow us there on Twitter at OMagicDaily. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub, for even more Orlando Magic content. That's patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. And as always, thank you for your support. I hope everyone has a great weekend. We'll see you all on Monday. We'll do some draft combine review, talk about prospects who showed up and showed out at the NBA draft combine, including wingspans. I did not forget about wingspans. We got those. That'll be up on OrlandoMagicDaily.com as well on Friday. But before we leave, be sure to check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube and now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is free 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. That's going to do it for me today, though. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. For Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.